cowboy helped an Apache woman fix her wagon. Next day, war paint riders ringed his cabin. Dalton Keene woke to the sound of hooves, hundreds of them circling. Like thunder, trapped in a valley, he looked through the gap in his shutters and saw what no man should see alone. An army of warriors painted for war, their bows drawn and pointed at his door. He had no memory of offending anyone. No blood on his hands, no stolen land. Just 24 hours earlier, he had helped a stranded woman repair a broken wheel on her wagon. Now he was surrounded by enough arrows to turn his cabin into kindling. And the worst part, he had no idea why. Dalton's cabin sat at the edge of a stretch of dry land where few people traveled. He liked it that way. No neighbors meant no trouble, and trouble had a way of finding men who didn't want it. The isolation suited him until yesterday when he found her. The woman had been kneeling beside her wagon. When he rode past, her hands working at a wheel that had cracked clean through the hub. The heat was brutal that afternoon, the kind that made the air shimmer and turned breathing into labor. She didn't call out to him, didn't wave. Just kept working, her focus locked on the broken wood like she could will it back together. He should have kept riding. That's what men did out here. Minded their business, kept their heads down, survived, but something about the way she worked, silent and determined in the middle of nowhere, made him pull his horse to a stop. He dismounted without a word and walked over, his boots crunching against the cracked earth. She looked up at him then, and he saw her. Eyes dark, unreadable, framed by loose strands of black hair that had escaped her braid. She wore traditional Apache clothing, the kind adorned with turquoise stones that caught the light. Her face showed no fear, no relief at his presence, just a steady, measuring gaze that made him feel like he was the one being evaluated. He gestured to the, well, she considered him for a long moment, then stepped back, giving him space to work. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. The work was simple enough. Replacing the broken spoke with a piece of ironwood he carried in his saddle bag, securing it with rawhide cord. His hands moved with the efficiency of someone who had fixed 100 broken things in his life. She watched every movement, not with gratitude, but with the intensity of someone memorizing details. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. When he finished, he stood and brushed the dust from his hands. She tested the wheel, rolling it back and forth, then gave a single nod. No smile, no thank you. She climbed onto the wagon seat, took the reins, and drove off without looking back. The whole exchange had lasted maybe 20 minutes. Dalton had returned to his cabin, unsaddled his horse, and thought nothing more of it. Just another moment in a long string of moments that made up his quiet life. He ate a cold meal, lay down on his cot, and fell asleep to the sound of wind scraping against the wooden walls. The sound of hooves woke him before dawn. Not one horse, not 10, an ocean of them moving. In synchronized silence around his cabin, he grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. What he saw made his blood go cold. They surrounded him completely. Warriors on horseback, their faces painted with red and black streaks, their chests bare despite the morning chill. Some held bows with arrows already nocked. Others carried spears, decorated with feathers that moved in the wind. There had to be 300 of them, maybe more, arranged in perfect circles that stretched as far as he could see. And at the front, sitting motionless on a painted horse, was the woman from yesterday. She wore the same turquoise jewelry, but now she sat flanked by 2 massive warriors whose presence screamed authority. She stared directly at his cabin, her expression carved from stone. Dalton's mind raced. Had he insulted her somehow? Touched something sacred when he fixed the wheel? Broken some law he didn't know existed? His hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the rifle tighter. One of the warriors raised a spear high above his head. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye turned toward Dalton's cabin. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or the creak of leather. Then the warrior slammed the spear into the ground, and the sound echoed like a judge's gavel. Dalton's breath caught in his throat, whatever was about to happen, there was no running from it. He was trapped inside a circle of warriors who had come for him. And the woman he had helped yesterday sat at the center of it all, watching him like she was waiting for something. But waiting for what? Dalton stayed frozen behind the shutter, his rifle, barrel resting against the window frame. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cold, but the warriors didn't move. They sat like statues carved from the desert itself, their painted faces expressionless, their weapons ready, but not raised in immediate threat. He counted them again, closer to 403, an impossible number for a single man to face, even if he had a 100. Bullets, he'd be dead before he fired 20. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. The woman remained at the front of the formation, positioned between two warriors whose bare chests displayed intricate paint patterns that marked them as leaders. She wore a decorated vest over her dress now, something she hadn't worn yesterday. The turquoise stones at her neck caught the sunlight and threw blue sparks across the dust. One of the lead warriors dismounted. He was massive, easily a head taller than the men around him, with shoulders that looked capable of breaking horses. Red paint streaked across his face in 3 thick lines. He walked forward with the measured pace of someone who owned the ground beneath his feet. Dalton's finger moved to the trigger. His palms were slick. The warrior stopped 20 paces from the cabin door and drove his spear into the earth, with enough force to make it quiver. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silence in a language Dalton didn't understand. The words were sharp, formal, rhythmic, like a declaration being read aloud. When he finished, he stepped back and waited. Dalton's mind scrambled for meaning. Was that a challenge, a warning, an invitation? He had no context, no translator, no way to navigate whatever protocol was unfolding. In front of him, his isolation, which had always felt like protection, now felt like a death sentence. Minutes passed. The sun grew hotter. Sweat ran down Dalton's spine and soaked into his shirt. Still, no one moved. The horses shifted their weight. The wind pushed dust across the open ground, but the warriors remained locked in position, their eyes fixed on his cabin like they could see through the walls. Then the woman made a gesture, small, almost imperceptible. She raised her right hand, palm facing outward, and held it there for 3 heartbeats before lowering it again. Immediately, 10 warriors dismounted. They walked forward in synchronized steps and formed a semicircle around the cabin's entrance. Each one carried a bow with an arrow already nocked. They didn't aim at the door. They simply stood there, a wall of muscle and intent. Dalton's breath came faster. This was escalation. Whatever they were waiting for, his time to provide, it was running out. But what did they want? For him to come outside, to speak, to fight, to surrender? He considered his options. If he opened the door, he might be shot before he could explain himself. If he stayed inside, they might torch the cabin or simply wait him out until thirst or hunger forced his hand. There was no good move, only varying degrees of bad. His eyes returned to the woman. She was watching the cabin with that same unreadable expression from yesterday. No anger, no impatience, just a steady, unwavering focus that suggested she would sit there for days if necessary. Who was she? The question burned hotter than the sun. Yesterday, she had seemed like a traveler in distress. Now she commanded hundreds of warriors with the authority of someone born to it. The turquoise, the decorated vest, the placement at the front of the formation. All of it pointed to status Dalton hadn't recognized. He had helped someone. Important, that much was clear, but important enough to bring an army? Important enough to orchestrate whatever this ceremony or trial or judgment was. The massive warrior who had spoken earlier raised his hand. The 10 men around the cabin lifted their bows in perfect unison, arrows now aimed directly at Dalton's door, not at the window where he stood, but at the entrance itself. The message was unmistakable. Come out now. Dalton's heart slammed against his ribs. His choices had narrowed to one. He could die inside like a cornered animal, or he could step outside and face whatever waited for him. Neither option offered hope, but at least one offered dignity. He lowered the rifle and leaned it against the wall. His hands shook as he moved toward the door. Every instinct screamed at him to barricade himself inside to make them work for his life. But something deeper, something he couldn't name, told him that hiding would be the worst choice he could make. His fingers closed around the door handle. The metal was hot from the sun. He took one breath, then another, through the gaps in the wood. He could see the arrows pointed at him, steady as iron. He pulled the door open and stepped into the light. The sunlight hit Dalton like a physical force. He stood in the doorway, unarmed, exposed to 400 warriors whose collective attention felt heavy enough to crush him. The 10 men with drawn bows didn't flinch. Their arrows remained trained on his chest, steady as stone. The massive warrior who had spoken earlier stepped forward. Up close, he was even larger than Dalton had estimated. Scars crossed his bare chest in patterns that told stories Dalton couldn't read. The red paint on his face made his eyes seem darker, harder, like chips of obsidian. He stopped 3 paces away and spoke again in that same formal tone. The words were incomprehensible, but the rhythm suggested a question being asked. The warrior waited, his gaze locked on Dalton's face, searching for something. Dalton spread his hands slowly, palms outward, showing he carried no weapon. He kept his voice level, though his throat was dry as sand. "I don't understand what you're saying." Warrior's expression didn't change. He repeated the question slower this time, each syllable deliberate, and waited. When Dalton still showed no comprehension, the warrior turned and gestured toward the woman. She dismounted with fluid grace and walked forward. The warriors parted for her, without needing instruction, creating a path through their ranks. As she approached, Dalton noticed details he had missed yesterday: the intricate beadwork on her vest, the silver bands around her wrists, the way every man present seemed to track her movement with reverence. She stopped beside the large warrior and studied Dalton with those same unreadable eyes. Then she spoke, and her voice carried an accent. But the words were English. "He asks if you knew who I was when you stopped yesterday." Dalton's mind raced. This was a test. The wrong answer could mean his life, but he had no idea what the right answer was supposed to be. "No," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I saw someone who needed help." She translated his words. The large warrior's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly around them. Some of the mounted warriors shifted in their saddles. The tension thickened. The woman spoke again. "He asked why you helped me without asking my name or my people, because it didn't matter." Dalton said, "A broken wheel is a broken wheel." She translated. This time the large warrior's reaction was more visible. His eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a glance with the woman that Dalton couldn't interpret. Agreement, suspicion, anger. The woman turned back to Dalton. "I am Ka, daughter of an Al Nish." She gestured to the massive warrior beside her. "This is my father. You touched the wagon of chieftain's daughter without permission. You place your hands on property that belongs to our people. This is a violation that demands answer." Dalton's stomach dropped. A chieftain's daughter, that explained the numbers, the ceremony, the careful protocol. He had stumbled into something far more serious than a simple act of kindness. "I meant no disrespect," he said carefully. "I didn't know I would have. What you would have done does not matter." Kaya interrupted. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes held something complex, not quite anger, but not forgiveness either. "What matters is what you did. You saw a woman alone and vulnerable, and you acted." Some would say this shows character. Others would say it shows arrogance, assuming you had the right to approach. Nalna spoke again, his tone harder now, more demanding. Ka translated, "My father asks if you would have helped if you knew who I was." It was another trap. If Dalton said yes, he admitted he didn't care about their laws. If he said no, he admitted his help was conditional, worth less than genuine kindness. The truth was all he had left. "I don't know," Dalton said. "I hope I would have, but I can't say for certain." Ka's expression shifted slightly. Was that approval? She translated, and Nish studied Dalton with new intensity. Then the chieftain did something unexpected. He reached to his belt and drew a long knife, its blade gleaming in the sunlight. He held it up so everyone could see, then drove it into the ground between himself and Dalton. The gesture sent a ripple through the assembled warriors. Some straightened in their saddles. Others exchanged glances. Ka's face remained neutral, but her shoulders tensed. She looked at Dalton, and for the first time, he saw something like concern in her eyes. "My father has made his decision," she said quietly. "You will be tested. If you pass, you will be honored as one who acted with true heart. If you fail, you will answer for the violation with your life." Dalton's pulse hammered in his ears. What kind of test? Kaya glanced at the knife standing upright in the dirt, then back at Dalton, the kind that proves whether your actions yesterday were guided by courage or foolishness. Nalna spoke again, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors. Kaya listened without expression, then turned to Dalton. "You will ride with us to the sacred grounds," she said. "There you will face 3 challenges. The first tests your body, the second tests your mind, the third tests your heart. Survive all 3, and my people will know you acted with honor. Fail any one of them, and you will not leave that place." Dalton's mouth went dry. "And if I refuse," Ka's eyes hardened, "then my father will consider your help yesterday an insult, a white man's arrogance. The warriors you see here will ensure you never insult anyone again." It wasn't a choice. It had never been a choice. "How far are these sacred grounds?" Dalton asked. "Half a day's ride." Ka said. "We leave now, too." Warriors brought forward a horse. Strong ran, with intelligent eyes, and no saddle. They handed Dalton the reins, but no bridle. He would ride as they did, with only his legs and balance to guide the animal. Another test before the test even began. Dalton mounted carefully. The horse shifted beneath him, testing his weight, judging his confidence. He kept his breathing steady and his hands light on the animal's mane around him. The warriors watched every movement. Nalnish gave a sharp command. The formation shifted with practiced precision. Warriors surrounded Dalton on all sides, boxing him in so completely that escape would be impossible. Kaya rode at the front beside her father, her back straight and her gaze fixed ahead. They moved as one, hundreds of horses creating a sound like distant thunder. The dust they raised formed a cloud that turned the sun hazy and coated Dalton's throat. No one spoke. The silence felt intentional, heavy with judgment. Dalton's mind raced as they rode. What kind of challenges awaited him? Physical tests. He could understand strength, endurance, pain tolerance, but tests of mind and heart. How did you measure those? How did you pass or fail something so subjective? He studied the warriors around him. Their faces remained expressionless, painted with symbols he couldn't interpret. Some were young, barely old enough to grow beards. Others bore scars that mapped decades of survival. All of them moved with the fluid confidence of people who had spent their lives on horseback. The landscape changed as they traveled. The flat desert gave way to rising hills covered in scrub brush and twisted trees. Rock formations jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The air grew thinner, harder to pull into his lungs. After 2 hours of riding, Ka dropped back from the front and positioned her horse alongside Dalton's. She rode in silence for several minutes, her eyes scanning the horizon. Finally, she spoke. "You wonder why I was alone yesterday?" It wasn't a question, but Dalton nodded. "I was being tested as well," she said quietly. "My father believes I'm too soft, too willing to see good in outsiders. He sent me into the desert alone to learn the dangers of trusting strangers." She glanced at him. "When you stopped to help, you proved his point." Dalton felt the trap closing around him from a new angle. "I made things worse for you." "Yes," Ka said simply. "Now I must prove that my judgment was not flawed, that allowing you to help was not weakness." Her jaw tightened. "If you fail these tests, I fail as well. My father will never allow me to speak in council again. I will be married off to strengthen an alliance and forgotten." The weight of that revelation settled on Dalton's shoulders. This wasn't just about him. Ka's future hung in the balance alongside his life. "Why tell me this?" he asked. Ka's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something raw there, fear mixed with determination. "Because if you understand what is truly at stake, you will fight harder to survive, and I need you to survive." Before Dalton could respond, a shout came from the front of the formation. The warriors ahead had stopped. Between two massive rock formations, Dalton could see an opening, a natural gateway that led into a hidden valley. Nalnish raised his hand, and the entire group halted. He turned in his saddle and looked back at Dalton with eyes that promised nothing but judgment. Kaya's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We have arrived. Whatever happens next, do not show fear. They will interpret it as guilt." The warriors began moving forward again, funneling through the narrow passage. Dalton's horse followed, carrying him toward whatever waited on the other side. And with each step, the walls of stone grew higher, blocking out the sun. The hidden valley opened before them like a wound in the earth. Steep cliff walls rose on all sides, creating a natural arena that trapped sound and heat. At the center stood a flat expanse of hard-packed dirt, empty except for 3 wooden posts driven deep into the ground, each one twice the height of a man. The warriors formed a circle around the perimeter, their horses creating a living barrier. Dalton dismounted when the others did, his legs stiff from the ride. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with the weight of countless ceremonies performed in this exact spot. Nish dismounted and walked to the center of the arena. He spoke in his language, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The warriors responded in unison, a single word that sounded like acknowledgement and commitment combined. Ka appeared at Dalton's side. "He is telling them why we are here, that you violated sacred law by touching what belonged to his family, that you will now prove whether your heart is worthy of forgiveness." "How many people have stood here before me?" Dalton asked Kaz. Silence was answer enough. 3 warriors stepped forward, each carrying something. The first held a long rope, made of braided leather. The second carried a clay vessel sealed with wax. The third held a bundle wrapped in cloth. Nalnish gestured to the first warrior, who approached Dalton and held out the rope. Ka translated her father's words. "The first test is endurance. You will be tied to the post. You will stand while the sun crosses the sky. You will not sit. You will not lean. You will not call out." She paused. "If you fall before the sun touches the western wall, you fail." Dalton looked up. The sun was directly overhead. That meant hours, maybe 4, maybe 6, standing without support under the brutal heat. Men had died from less, but refusing meant immediate death. He nodded. The warriors moved with efficient brutality. They bound his wrists behind the center post, the leather rope tight enough to cut off circulation if he fought it. They positioned his feet shoulder-width apart and marked the ground around them with white powder. If he moved his feet from those marks, he failed. Then they stepped back and Dalton was alone in the center of the circle. The sun felt like it was burning holes through his skull. Sweat soaked his shirt within minutes. His arms, pulled backward around the post, began to ache almost immediately. The position forced his chest forward and his shoulders back, making each breath a conscious effort. The warriors watched in silence. No one moved, no one spoke. They simply sat on their horses and stared, 400 pairs of eyes tracking every twitch, every grimace, every moment of weakness. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time lost meaning under that merciless sun. Dalton's legs began to tremble. His shoulders screamed for relief. The rope around his wrists had rubbed the skin raw, and he could feel blood trickling down his forearms. He focused on breathing, in through his nose, out through his mouth. Each breath, a small victory against the pain trying to drag him down. Through the haze of heat and exhaustion, he saw Ka watching from the front of the circle. Her face showed nothing, but her hands gripped her horse's mane so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. She needed him to survive this. Her future depended on it. That thought became an anchor. When his knees threatened to buckle, he remembered Ka's voice. "I need you to survive." When the pain in his shoulders turned into fire, he thought about what failure meant not just for him, but for her. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Dalton's vision began to blur. His mouth was so dry his tongue felt swollen. Flies landed on his face, and he couldn't brush them away. One crawled across his eyeball, and he had to blink it off, the simple movement. Feeling like a defeat, but he didn't fall. Finally, the shadow of the western wall began to creep across the arena floor. It moved like honey, thick and slow, but it moved inch by inch. It approached the white marks around Dalton's feet. When the shadow touched the powder, Nownish stood. He walked to Dalton and examined him with cold, clinical eyes. Then he drew his knife and cut the ropes. Dalton's arms fell forward, and the relief was so intense it almost dropped him. He locked his knees and stayed upright, swaying but standing. Nownish spoke a single word. Ka's voice carried across the arena. And this time there was something new in its surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. You have passed the first test, she said, but understand this. What comes next is harder. The second test does not measure your body. It measures your judgment. And men with strong bodies often have weak minds. The warrior with the clay vessel stepped forward. He broke the wax seal and tilted the container, pouring its contents onto the ground at Dalton's feet. Water, fresh, clean water that soaked into the thirsty earth and disappeared. Dalton stared at it, his cracked lips aching, his throat desperate for moisture. The warrior held out the vessel, offering it to him, but something in the way everyone watched made Dalton hesitate. This was the second test, and somehow drinking that water was the wrong answer. Dalton stared at the vessel in the warrior's hands. Every fiber of his body screamed for that water. His throat was raw, his lips split and bleeding. He had just endured hours under the sun without a single drop of moisture. The water was right there, being offered directly to him. But the absolute silence told him everything. For 100 warriors watched without moving, without breathing. This was the trap. His eyes found Ka in the crowd. She sat motionless on her horse, her face carefully blank, but her sure eyes were pleading with him to think, to see past the obvious. Dalton looked at the warrior holding the vessel. Then he looked past him, scanning the circle of watching faces. Young warriors, old warriors, men who had ridden for hours in the same heat he had endured, men who would ride for hours more to return home. The water was not meant for him. Dalton's hand trembled as he reached out, but instead of taking the vessel, he pushed it back toward the warrior. His voice came out as a rasp, barely audible. Give it to them, the warriors. Eyes widened slightly around the circle. Dalton heard movement, shifting weight, released breath, the creak of leather. Nownish stood from where he had been sitting and walked forward, his face unreadable. Ka translated what Dalton had said, and Nish responded with a long statement that made several warriors nod in approval. Kaya's voice carried relief. She didn't bother hiding. He says, "You have proven you understand the second law. A man who thinks only of himself will die alone in the desert. A man who thinks of others first will never thirst because others will remember his sacrifice." The warrior with the vessel raised it high so everyone could see, then took a long drink himself. He passed it to the warrior beside him, who drank and passed it on. The vessel made its way around the entire circle, each man taking only what he needed until it returned empty to the center. Nalish approached Dalton and studied him with new intensity. When he spoke, his tone had changed, still formal, still measured, but lacking the edge of hostility that had colored his earlier words. Kaya translated, "My father says you have passed 2 tests that have broken stronger men. Your body proved resilient, your mind proved wise." She paused, and something dark flickered across her face. "But the 3rd test is the one that matters most. It is the test that reveals what a man truly values. And it is the test where most men fail." The 3rd warrior stepped forward, the one carrying the cloth bundle. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing what lay inside. Dalton's breath caught. It was a knife, not just any knife, but one with a blade of polished obsidian and a handle wrapped in leather and beads. Even from a distance, Dalton could see the craftsmanship, the care that had gone into creating it. This was not a weapon, it was art. The warrior placed the knife on the ground at Dalton's feet, then stepped back. Nalnish spoke, and Kaz. Translation came slowly, as if she were choosing each word with care. This knife belonged to my mother, she said quietly. She died when I was young. It is the only thing I have of hers. Her voice tightened. My father asks you this: if you had known who I was yesterday, if you had known my mother's knife was in that wagon, would you have helped me? Or would you have taken the knife and left me stranded? Dalton's mind reeled. This was not a test he could pass with endurance or clever thinking. This was a test designed to expose the core of who he was, and there was no right answer that would satisfy everyone watching. If he said he would have helped anyway, some would call him a liar. Men did not refuse valuable items when they found them in the desert. If he said he would have taken the knife, he admitted to being the kind of man who would steal from someone in need. The truth was more complicated than either option allowed. Dalton looked at Ka. Her jaw was set, her eyes hard, but beneath that he saw a vulnerability she could not quite hide. This test was not just about him. It was about whether her judgment in allowing him to help had been sound. He looked at the knife, then at Nalnish, then back at Ka. I cannot answer that question, Dalton said. The assembled warriors erupted. Some shouted in anger, others gestured aggressively. Nalnish's face darkened like a storm rolling across the desert. But Dalton kept speaking, his voice steady despite the chaos. I cannot answer because yesterday I did not know who she was. I cannot claim I would have done the same if I had known, because I will never be that man again. Yesterday's choice is gone. All I have is today, and today, knowing everything I know now, I would help her again. I would help her even if it cost me my life. He picked up the knife and held it out to Ka, because some things matter more than survival. The silence that followed Dalton's words was absolute. Even the horses had gone still, as if the weight of the moment had spread beyond the humans into the animals themselves. Kaya stared at the knife in Dalton's outstretched hand, her face frozen in an expression caught between shock and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Nish stepped forward and took the knife from Dalton. He examined it closely, turning it over in his massive hands, his scarred fingers tracing the beadwork on the handle. When he looked up, his eyes held something Dalton had not seen before. Calculation mixed with grudging respect. The chieftain spoke at length, his voice carrying across the valley with the authority of a man who had commanded warriors his entire life. The assembled men listened in absolute silence, and when Nish finished, several of them struck their chests with closed fists. A gesture that needed no translation. Ka's voice was thick when she spoke. My father says you have answered the question no man has ever answered correctly. Others have claimed they would help. Others have admitted they would steal. But you are the first to say you cannot know what you would have done in ignorance, only what you would do with knowledge. She paused, struggling for composure. He says this is the mark of wisdom, to understand that we are different people at different moments, and that the man we were yesterday does not bind the man we can become today. Nish handed the knife back to Ka, then turned to face the assembled warriors. He raised both hands and spoke again, his tone shifting from formal judgment to something closer to proclamation. The warriors responded in unison, their voices creating a sound that rolled through the valley like thunder. They dismounted as one and struck the ground with their spear, but creating a rhythmic pounding that made the earth tremble. Ka moved closer to Dalton, close enough that only he could hear her whisper, "You have passed all 3 tests. My father is declaring you proven, a man of true heart who acted without knowing the stakes, and who would act the same way, knowing everything." Relief flooded through Dalton, so intense it nearly buckled his knees, but Ka's expression remained troubled. "There is more," she said quietly. "Passing the test means you are not guilty of violating our law, but it also means something else." She hesitated. "It means my father was wrong about me, wrong to test me, Wrong to doubt my judgment. Dalton saw the trap she was in if Nish admitted he was. Wrong. He weakened his authority in front of hundreds of warriors. But if he did not acknowledge Kaya's judgment had been sound, she would remain under suspicion, her voice and counsel forever diminished. Nalnish spoke directly to Ka, his tone harder now, challenging. Ka's response was immediate and firm. She spoke in her own language, her voice clear and unwavering. Whatever she said made several of the older warriors nod. Slowly, Nalnish's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt when she finished. Father and daughter stared at each other in a moment that felt like it would determine far more than just this day's outcome. Finally, Nish spoke a single word. Kaya's shoulders relaxed slightly. She turned to Dalton. He has agreed to hear my words in counsel, not as his daughter, but as one who has proven her judgment sound. Her eyes met his. Because of you, I have earned what I could not have earned any other way, respect through trial. Nish approached Dalton one final time. He placed his hand on Dalton's shoulder, the grip firm enough to hurt. Then he spoke words that needed no translation because the respect in his eyes said everything. Kaya translated anyway. He says, "You will ride back with us, not as a prisoner, but as a guest tonight. We honor you as one who passed the proving. Tomorrow, you'll be free to return to your cabin." The warriors began preparing for the return journey, but Ka remained standing beside Dalton. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice low. Dalton waited. "Why did you really stop yesterday? You live alone, you avoid people, yet you stop for a stranger who could have been anyone." Her eyes searched his face. "Why?" Dalton considered lying, considered giving her the noble answer she might want to hear, but after 3 tests designed to expose the truth, he owed her honesty. "Because I was tired of being alone," he said. "Simply because I thought helping someone might make me feel less empty inside." Kaya's expression softened. "And did it?" Dalton looked around at the 400 warriors preparing to escort him back at the valley where he had nearly died at. Ka standing beside him with her mother's knife now secured at her belt. "No," he said, "but it made me feel something, and that was enough." Kaya nodded slowly, understanding written in every line of her face. "Come," she said, "we have a long ride ahead, and my father wants you positioned at the front of the formation. It is a place of honor." As they walked toward the horses, Dalton realized that the sun was setting, painting the valley walls in shades of red and gold. The same sun that had tortured him hours ago now seemed almost gentle, a reminder that everything, pain, fear, judgment eventually passed, but some things he was learning left their mark forever. The journey back took them through the desert under a sky turning purple with dusk. Dalton rode at the front beside Nile, Nish, and Kaya, no longer a prisoner, but something else entirely, a man who had earned passage through trial. The warriors who had surrounded him with drawn weapons now rode alongside him as equals, their painted faces still intimidating but no longer hostile. When they reached Dalton's cabin, the sun had fully set. The warriors formed a wide circle around the small structure, and Dalton saw it differently now, not as his refuge from the world, but as the lonely prison he had built for himself. Nalnish dismounted and spoke to the assembled men. Several warriors immediately began gathering wood, building a fire in the clearing in front of Dalton's door. Others unpacked provisions from their saddlebags, dried meat, ground corn, water skins. Within minutes, a camp had materialized where hours earlier there had been only threat. Kaya gestured for Dalton to sit by the fire. He lowered himself onto the ground, his body aching from the day's ordeals around him. Warriors settled into positions, creating a gathering that felt more like a celebration than a siege. Nalnish stood and spoke at length, his voice carrying the weight of formal pronouncement. When he finished, every warrior present struck their chest with a closed fist and spoke a single word in unison. Kaya leaned close to Dalton. "He has declared you recognized. In our language, it means you are seen as worthy, someone who could be trusted to act with honor." Even when no one is watching, she paused. It is not a title given lightly. One of the older warriors approached carrying a leather cord strung with 3 small stones, white, red, and black. He handed it to Nish, who in turn offered it to Dalton. The 3 stones represent the 3 tests, Kaya translated, white for endurance of body, red for clarity of mind, black for truth of heart, where this and any of our people who see it will know you have been proven. Dalton took the cord with hands that trembled slightly. The stones were simple, unremarkable except for what they represented. He tied the cord around his wrist. The warriors shared food around the fire, passing portions to Dalton as an equal. They spoke in their language, occasionally gesturing to him with what seemed like approval or curiosity. Nalnish sat across the flames, watching Dalton with eyes that had moved from judgment to something closer to acceptance. As the night deepened, warriors began departing in small groups, riding off into the darkness until only a dozen remained. Ka stayed seated by the fire, her father beside her. Finally, Nalnish stood and approached Dalton. He extended his hand, not in the way white men shook hands, but palm to palm, fingers interlaced, a grip that spoke of mutual respect. Dalton returned the gesture, and Nalnish nodded once before mounting his horse. Ka remained behind as her father led the last of the warriors away. She and Dalton sat in silence as the sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the crackle of the dying fire. "What will you do now?" Ka asked quietly. Dalton looked at his cabinet. The small window that had seemed like protection but now felt like limitation. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Yesterday, I knew exactly what my life was. Today, I'm not sure that life fits anymore." Ka nodded. "That is the purpose of the proving. It shows us who we are, by forcing us to become more than we were." She stood and brushed dust from her dress. "The woman you helped yesterday was being tested. The woman who leaves tonight has earned her voice. We are both different now. Will I see you again?" Dalton asked. Kaya's expression softened. "Our people do not make promises about the future, but I will say this. You know where to find me if you ever need help fixing a wagon." The ghost of a smile crossed her face, and Dalton found himself returning it. She mounted her horse with practiced ease and looked down at him one final time. "Thank you, Dalton Keene, for stopping when you could have ridden past, for being the man I believed you to be." Then she turned her horse and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Dalton alone by the fire. He sat there for a long time, watching the embers fade to ash. The 3 stones on his wrist caught the last light of the flames. Tomorrow he would wake in his cabin as he had for years, but he would not wake as the same man. Some encounters changed you whether you planned for them or not. Some choices made in a single moment of kindness rippled outward in ways you could never predict, and some days that began with terror ended with transformation. Dalton touched the stones on his wrist and smiled. He had helped a stranger fix a broken wagon wheel, and in return she had helped him fix something far more broken, the isolation he had been carrying inside himself for longer than he cared to remember. The cabin door stood open behind him, but for the first time in years, Dalton was in no hurry to close it. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where one choice changes everything in ways you never expected. Do not forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.